Here's a story that perfectly captures the high-stakes chess game between big tech and political power. Apple just made a massive promise to bring manufacturing back to America, but there's way more to this story than meets the eye. When tech giants bow to political pressure, the ripple effects can reshape entire industries overnight. That's exactly what happened Wednesday when Apple CEO Tim Cook stood alongside President Trump in the Oval Office, announcing what could be one of the most significant supply chain shifts in modern tech history. But here's where it gets controversial. Is this genuine reshoring, or just an elaborate PR dance to avoid crippling tariffs? The timing couldn't be more telling. Apple's splashy announcement came just hours before Trump's latest wave of country-specific tariffs were scheduled to kick in. The president wasn't done flexing his trade war muscles, either. He dropped the bombshell during the event, warning that semiconductors, the beating heart of every iPhone, iPad, and MacBook, would face a staggering 100% tariff. Let's break this down for those unfamiliar with trade policy. A 100% tariff essentially doubles the cost of imported goods. For context, that means a semiconductor chip that normally costs $10 to import would suddenly cost $20. When you're talking about millions of chips needed for Apple's massive production volumes, those numbers become astronomical fast. Trump dangled a carrot alongside his stick, though. For any company building in the United States of America, there's no charge, he declared. Translation: play by our rules on American soil, or pay through the nose. Apple's response was swift and substantial. The company announced it would manufacture glass covers for every single iPhone and Apple Watch sold worldwide, right here in the United States. This isn't small potatoes. We're talking about millions upon millions of devices annually. The manufacturing will happen through their longtime partner Corning at their Harrodsburg, Kentucky facility, backed by a hefty $2.5 billion commitment. Here's what most people miss about this Kentucky plant. It's been a glass manufacturing powerhouse for over 6 decades. Since 2021, Corning has already been producing glass components for iPhones, Apple Watches, and iPads at this very location. In fact, every generation of iPhone glass has rolled off this Kentucky production line. So in some ways, Apple is doubling down on an existing relationship rather than starting from scratch. The scale of this operation is mind-boggling. Corning will dedicate their entire Kentucky facility exclusively to Apple manufacturing, which means boosting their local engineering and manufacturing workforce by a whopping 50%. For a small Kentucky town, this represents a significant economic boom that could transform the local job market. I'm very proud to say that today we're committing an additional $100 billion to the United States, Cook announced during their White House photo op. This bumps Apple's total U.S. investment commitment from $500 billion to a staggering $600 billion over the next 4 years. Cook didn't stop there. He revealed that Apple had already signed new agreements with 10 companies across America for additional manufacturing partnerships. One particularly intriguing commitment involves purchasing American-made advanced rare earth magnets, a strategic move considering China's dominance in rare earth materials. And this is the part most people miss. The investment web extends far beyond Apple itself. Applied Materials, a key Apple supplier, simultaneously announced a $200 million investment in an Arizona factory that produces chip-making equipment. This equipment will then be used by Texas Instruments, another Apple supplier, to manufacture semiconductors specifically for Apple products. It's a carefully orchestrated supply chain symphony designed to keep more value creation on American soil. Apple also committed to building a massive 250,000 square foot server manufacturing facility in Houston, plus investing billions in data centers spanning from North Carolina to Iowa to Oregon. The Houston facility alone is expected to open by 2026, creating hundreds of high-tech jobs. But here's where the story takes a reality check. Despite all these announcements, Cook admitted to reporters that final assembly of iPhones wouldn't happen in the US for a while. The vast majority of iPhone manufacturing and assembly will continue happening in India and China. So while Apple is bringing significant components and infrastructure to America, your next iPhone will still likely be assembled in China or made in India. This creates an interesting contradiction that's worth pondering. Apple is making massive investments in U.S. manufacturing capabilities, yet the most labor-intensive and visible part of production, final assembly, remains overseas. Is this a gradual transition strategy, or are some aspects of global manufacturing simply too entrenched to change quickly? The financial stakes are enormous for Apple. Even with current exemptions for most Apple products while the Commerce Department conducts national security investigations, the company still absorbed an $800 million tariff hit last quarter. They're projecting another $1.5 billion impact over the next 3 months. These aren't insignificant numbers, even for a company with Apple's resources. Trump had made his expectations crystal clear in a May social media post. I have long ago informed Tim Cook of Apple that I expect their iPhones that will be sold in the United States of America will be manufactured and built in the United States, not India or any place else. Wednesday's announcement was clearly Apple's response to that very public demand. However, Trump himself acknowledged the timeline reality during the event. So I don't know when it shows up, but there are a lot of factories and a lot of plants that are either under construction or soon will be starting construction, he admitted. So can't tell you exactly when, but I want to be around in about a year from now and 2 years from now, because we're going to see an explosion, I think. This brings us to a crucial question. How realistic are these massive investment pledges? Apple's commitment bears striking similarities to other recent mega announcements. OpenAI, Oracle, and Japan's SoftBank collectively pledged $500 billion to build AI data centers across the country. The fanfare was enormous, with promises to immediately begin investing. But months later, reports suggest those plans have hit significant snags, with only one small Ohio data center planned by year's end. Even more telling is Trump's recent trade agreement with the European Union, which he claimed included $600 billion in U.S. investments and $750 billion in energy purchases. They gave me $600 billion, and that's a gift, Trump boasted on CNBC. Yet the EU quickly clarified that European companies have only expressed interest in investing at least $600 billion, a far cry from committed investments. The EU has no mechanism to incentivize these investments, and the $750 billion energy figure is merely a projection of potential purchases over 3 years. So here's the controversial question that deserves discussion. Are we witnessing genuine industrial reshoring, or elaborate political theater designed to satisfy protectionist pressures while maintaining the status quo? On one hand, Apple's commitments involve concrete facilities, specific partnerships, and measurable job creation. The Corning deal alone represents real manufacturing capability and employment. On the other hand, the most valuable and visible aspects of iPhone production remain firmly planted overseas. The broader implications extend far beyond Apple. If major tech companies can successfully navigate tariff pressures through strategic domestic investments while maintaining global supply chains, it could become the playbook for the entire industry. Alternatively, if these commitments prove more aspirational than actual, it might signal the limits of using trade policy to reshape global manufacturing. What's your take on this high-stakes negotiation between political power and corporate strategy? Do you think Apple's commitments represent genuine reshoring that will benefit American workers, or clever maneuvering to avoid tariffs while changing as little as possible? And perhaps most importantly, should consumers expect to pay more for iPhones as these supply chain shifts unfold, regardless of where final assembly happens? The answers to these questions will likely determine whether this moment represents a turning point in American manufacturing, or just another chapter in the ongoing trade policy drama. What side of this debate do you find yourself on?